The creation story that we find in the book of Genesis, I believe, can be greatly illuminated and enhanced by an understanding, a basic understanding of the creation stories of other ancient Near Eastern cultures. If we look at the Babylonians, for example, it's quite interesting. I'll try to sum it up very succinctly, but they believe that that water was on the face of the earth from the very beginning. So in that sense, it parallels the biblical text. But they believe that this water was composed of two different elements. There was a sweetwater ocean that they called Apsu, and there was a saltwater ocean that was called Tiamat. And Apsu was the male, and Tiamat was the female. Now, they were also represented in the Babylonian worldview as these two great sea monsters. When the waters mixed, the salt water and the seawater, the sweet water, they would give rise to the gods. So it was sort of an act of procreation. And they believed that every generation of the gods, was produced by this mingling of the waters between the male and the female. Now, quite humorously, in the Babylonian creation story, Apsu and Tiamat become enraged because their children, the gods, are making too much noise. There's too much revelry, too much merriment, and they decide that they're going to go to war to destroy the gods so they can have some peace and quiet. Now, the gods find out about this, and they elect Marduk, who many people know, to lead the battle against essentially their parents. In the end, Tiamat, Apsu, and another entity called Kingu is killed. Now, Tiamat's body is slain in two, and basically you can imagine she's sort of separated, and the upper firmament is formed and the lower firmament is formed. And out of Kingu, out of his entrails, out of his blood, humanity is created. But the only purpose that they are created for is to be slaves to the gods. They are to sow, they're to till, they're to reap, and they're to give their food to feed the gods. It's a very interesting point of view. And if you look at the Babylonian way of life, you can see the hierarchy that exists, in terms of servitude and so forth. Now, the biblical tradition is very interesting because it also, as I mentioned, has the water as a fundamental element of creation. But what's interesting, of course, is that ultimately Hashem is the source of all things. Even the great sea monsters are, in fact, mentioned in the book of Genesis. The Tananim, they're mentioned, they're there, but they're mentioned almost in passing, and he created the great sea monsters as well. And it's an inversion, or it's a different perspective from that of the Babylonians, because the Babylonians believe that these entities, these monsters, were the source of humanity. But in the biblical text, Hashem creates these monsters. They're just another part of the brilliant design and scheme that he has, to build, a world that is filled with living beings. It's an amazing picture, an amazing portrait. And these sea monsters are of no consequence. I mean, he makes them to fill the water, but it is he who holds the ultimate power. Now, I think the most critical element that differentiates the biblical text from the Babylonian myths and the myths of other peoples in the area is this. In the Babylonian story, humanity is meant to be slaves. But when Adam and Chava sin, the Torah tells us that Hashem walked in the garden. And what does he say? And I think these are the most powerful words that we find, not only in this week's Parashat, but essentially throughout the Tanakh. He says, Adam, where are you? Because Hashem was looking to have a relationship, to engage with his creation. And it's an amazing differentiation between the worldview of the Babylonians and of the Sumerians and the Akkadians and the Canaanites and all these other peoples, but it ultimately speaks to us because Hashem says the same thing today. Where are you? And I think that is what differentiates the biblical text from all these other traditions and other religious traditions that may have a very different view on the importance of humanity. God desires, Hashem desires to have interaction, engagement, and fellowship, relationship with his creation. So we never forget how much Hashem desires to connect with us. And may we live lives that are full of kedusha, of holiness, that we might merit to have that intimacy with Hashem.